Hey there, welcome to Relic of Stories. This is where the forgotten whispers of history, the hidden mysteries, and the strange wonders of our past come alive. Here, we dust off the old maps, unlock ancient doors, and wander through tales that the world has almost forgotten. Every story you hear will take you somewhere. Maybe to a lost city, a secret society, or a mystery carved in stone centuries ago. And we tell them the way stories were meant to be told, slowly, vividly, and in a way that lets you feel the footsteps of those who came before us. If you love journeys through time, if you love the kind of tales that keep your mind wandering long after the video ends, you're in the right place. So, settle in. Let the world outside fade away, and step into the past with us. Because here at Relic of Stories, the past is never truly gone. Chapter 1: The Devil's Bible, a book written in a single night by a damned monk. You have to imagine the room first. The candlelight barely reaching the edges of the stone walls, the smell of parchment, that warm, dry scent that comes from centuries of still air and dust. And in the middle, on a heavy wooden stand, a book. No, not just a book. A thing so large, so impossible, that you'd swear it couldn't have been made by human hands. Nearly 3 feet tall, almost as wide when opened, and weighing more than a small child. Its leather binding is darkened with age, its edges scarred by fire, war, and time. The pages, hundreds of them, are thick as thin cardboard, made from the skins of animals long dead. And in the very center of it, staring out with eyes that seem to follow you, is the devil himself. This is the Codex Gigas. They call it the Devil's Bible. The official history will tell you it was made in the early 13th century in the Kingdom of Bohemia, what we now know as the Czech Republic, that it was the work of a Benedictine monk living in a monastery at Podlajic, that it's a manuscript like no other, the entire Latin Vulgate Bible, written in a perfect unbroken hand from start to finish. And not just the Bible. It also contains medical treatises, magic spells, exorcisms, calendars, even the complete works of Flavius Josephus, the Roman historian. But the legends tell a different story. They say there was once a monk who broke his sacred vows so terribly that he faced the harshest punishment the church could give. Not death, something worse. He was to be walled up alive, sealed in darkness, without food, without water, until his life slipped away. In desperation, he begged for mercy, and in that moment, he made an impossible promise. He would create a book, the greatest book the world had ever seen, and he would do it in a single night. The abbots agreed, knowing it couldn't be done. But that night, when the monk realized he could never keep his word, he turned not to God, but to something else. They say he prayed to the devil, and the devil answered. When morning came, the monk presented the Codex Gigas, every page flawless, every letter without error. The handwriting never changes, as if it was written by one hand in a single stretch without fatigue. And there, in the middle, was the portrait. A full page, almost glowing with strange energy, showing the devil seated between 2 towers, claws spread wide, eyes fixed on the reader. From that day forward, the monastery kept the book locked away. This is the kind of tale that could have stayed as just a fireside whisper, if not for one thing. The book is real. You can see it today in the National Library of Sweden. You can walk right up to the glass case and look at it, just as kings and soldiers and scholars have done for centuries. And standing in front of it, you will feel small, because no one has been able to fully explain it, the scale of the impossible. It's not just the size that's unsettling, Though it is the largest surviving medieval manuscript in the world, it's the sheer labor involved. Experts have estimated that to write the text alone, even without illustrations, would have taken at least 5 years of non-stop work. And that's if one person wrote 8 hours a day, every day. But the writing is perfect. Not just neat, but unnervingly consistent. No variation in ink flow, no shift in style, no fading from fatigue. This is something even skilled scribes, working under the best conditions, could not achieve. And the illustrations? They're sparse, but deliberate. The portrait of Satan is unlike anything else from that time. Not a vague symbolic devil, but a creature with an almost physical presence, sitting in a void of black and red, through fire and war. The Codex Gigas has survived disasters that destroyed entire cities. In 1648, during the 30 Years' War, Swedish forces sacked Prague. The book was taken as spoils of war and brought to Stockholm. In 1697, when a fire broke out in the royal castle, it was thrown from a window to save it from the flames. The impact damaged its binding, but the pages survived, not a single one destroyed. It's strange to think about, hundreds of manuscripts lost forever in Europe's long, violent history. But this one, this book of all books, is still here. The uneasy feeling. People who've seen it in person often say the same thing. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also heavy. Not just physically, but in presence. When you stand in front of it, the air seems to shift. Some say that's just the awe of seeing such a relic. Others aren't so sure. There's a superstition among certain archivists in Sweden. You do not touch the glass case, not because of alarms, but because of respect or fear. The idea is that the Devil's Bible doesn't like being handled roughly. Fact or fable. Historians don't truly believe it was written in one night. The animal skins alone, more than 160 of them, would have taken months to prepare. The single handwriting might mean it was written by one person over a lifetime. And yet, no one can explain why the work shows no corrections, no errors, no fading. No one can explain why the devil's portrait was placed there at all, given its stark contrast to the rest of the manuscript. The monk's fate. The old legend says, the monk who made the pact vanished the day after the book was finished. Some say he was taken by the devil. Others say he lived on, but never spoke again. There's no record of his burial, no record of his name, just the book, sitting there like a heartbeat from another time, standing before it. If you ever find yourself in Stockholm and you go to see the Codex Gigas, try this. Stand quietly in front of it for a few moments. Let the noise of the room fade. Look at the page with the devil. Really look. Some visitors swear that, for just a moment, the figure seems to smile. And whether you believe the legend or not, you will leave with the sense that something in that room was watching you. Chapter 2. The Possession of Loudun. Nuns under the Devil's Grip. The little town of Loudun, in western France, is quiet now. The narrow streets wind past stone houses with faded shutters, and the air smells faintly of wood smoke from the chimneys. But in the 17th century, the air here was different. It was charged, heavy. Some said you could feel it before you even reached the convent. It began, as these things often do, with whispers. The Ursuline nuns of Loudun lived a life of strict devotion, prayers at dawn, long hours of silence, their world contained within high stone walls. But in the autumn of 1632, strange disturbances began to ripple through the quiet order. At night, the sisters began to hear knocking, 3 slow raps, as if from inside the walls. Doors that had been bolted were found open by morning, candles guttered and went out without wind. Then, the dreams began. Sister Jeanne des Anges, the Mother Superior, spoke of visions of a tall, dark man entering her chamber at night. He would stand at the foot of her bed, smiling faintly, his eyes fixed on her. His visits were silent, but she woke with the feeling of hands pressing against her throat. At first, the other nuns kept their unease private, but soon the quiet convent life shattered. One by one, the sisters began to convulse during prayers. They would scream obscenities in voices not their own. Their bodies twisted in impossible shapes, spines arching, limbs jerking violently. When held down, they would spit, laugh, and accuse. Always the same name, Urbain Grandier. Grandier was the parish priest of Loudun, charismatic, educated, and not without enemies. He was known for his eloquent sermons, his confidence, and his rumored affairs. Some believed he was too friendly with the city's women. Others whispered he had defied the powerful Cardinal Richelieu. To his supporters, he was a gifted man of God. To his enemies, he was dangerous, a perfect villain for what was unfolding. The accusations spread quickly. The nuns claimed Grandier had bewitched them, sending demons to possess their bodies. Public exorcisms were held in the convent courtyard, drawing crowds from across the region. Witnesses swore they saw the sisters levitate. Others claimed they understood languages they had never studied, Greek, Latin, even ancient dialects. And yet, some of these same performances seemed strangely theatrical. Certain nuns appeared to exaggerate their fits when more people were watching. But once suspicion takes root, it grows like wildfire. The trial of Urbain Grandier was as much political theater as it was religious judgment. The court produced a Devil's Pact, allegedly signed by Grandier himself, written in backwards Latin, naming demons as witnesses. Many believe it was a forgery, but it was enough. He was tortured, bound in irons, his legs crushed in the boot until the bones splintered. Still, he denied everything. On August 18, 1634, Grandier was burned alive in the public square. The nuns were present, watching from the edges of the crowd. The flames roared, the smell of smoke and flesh carried on the summer air. And yet, the possessions did not stop. For years after Grandier's death, the nuns continued to convulse, to scream, to speak in strange voices. Some claimed they still saw his face in the convent corridors. Sister Jeanne herself would later write memoirs describing how she remained tormented by visions of him for decades. It raises an unsettling thought. If Grandier was truly innocent, then whatever gripped Loudun was never his doing at all. Standing in the convent today, you might hear nothing but the creak of old beams and the echo of your own footsteps. The building is calm now. Sunlight filters through the small, high windows, painting warm squares on the flagstone floors. But if you press your palm to the cool wall, you might imagine the faint sound of knuckles tapping from somewhere deep within. 3 slow knocks. Chapter 3. The Weeping Icons. Holy images that bled and screamed. The churches of medieval Europe were not just places of worship. They were places of quiet power. Every candlelit corner, every lingering scent of incense, every shadow in the rafters carried the weight of centuries of prayer. And something else. Something people didn't always speak about. Among the locked cupboards and sealed chests of monasteries, there are records that were never meant to be read by the common faithful. They tell of paintings, icons, sculptures that behaved in ways no wood or stone should. These were not polite miracles that inspired pilgrimages. These were the kind that made priests bolt the doors and whisper hurried Latin in the dark. It might begin with a faint glimmer, as though the eyes of a painted Christ caught the light in a way they hadn't before. A parishioner might notice the change, and then see a bead of liquid forming at the corner of the painted eye. Sometimes it was clear, like water. Sometimes it was thick golden oil that smelled faintly of myrrh. And sometimes it was red. A slow trickle of blood inching down the varnished face. The first recorded case in these hidden archives comes from the year 1279, in a small chapel outside Florence. The Virgin's painted face was said to weep every night for a week. On the 8th day, a landslide buried half the village. In Cyprus, in the early 1400s, a carved wooden crucifix was said to let out a sound. Not a human scream, but a raw, tearing wail, moments before an earthquake struck. The priest who recorded the event begged in his notes that the crucifix be destroyed. It wasn't. The screams, he wrote, came again 3 months later. The church faced a dilemma with these events. Officially, they might be considered signs from God, warnings, calls to repentance. But in the centuries we now call the Dark Ages, such omens often bred panic. Villages emptied overnight. Fights broke out. So the clergy developed another approach. The icons were removed quietly in the dead of night. Some were buried in monastery gardens. Others were locked in sealed chapels, walled up with mortar. And a few were burned. But there are troubling patterns in the surviving notes. Priests who destroyed these icons often reported strange consequences, visions, sudden illnesses, accidents. One chronicle from 1523 describes an abbot who ordered a weeping image of Saint Michael burned in the cloister yard. The fire refused to take it first, no matter how much oil was poured on the wood. When the flames finally caught, the image was said to release a single, high-pitched sound that made the onlookers clutch their ears. The abbot was found dead the next morning, his hands burned black. Whether these icons were holy warnings or something else entirely is still argued in dusty theological corners. Were they signs of divine sorrow, or were they traps, objects that had become doors for something darker to step through? Today, most churches would deny such relics ever existed, but in certain rural chapels, where the wood is dark and the air smells of centuries, you might find an icon behind glass, its paint cracked, its eyes dulled with age. And, if you look closely enough, you might see the faint trace of a dried red line just beneath the varnish. Chapter 4. The Black Mass of Arras. Priests who worship the devil. Arras, in the 15th century, was a city of steeples and shadowed streets. A place where the bells marked time, not just for the faithful, but for those who feared what might happen when the bells stopped ringing. On the surface, it was like any other proud city in France. Its churches filled on feast days, its markets crowded with merchants shouting prices over the chatter of townsfolk. But beneath that layer of daily life, there was another Arras, an Arras of whispered rumors, glances over the shoulder, and candles burning in rooms where no prayers were spoken. It began with small things, strange shapes seen in the windows of church attics, priests meeting behind locked doors at hours when no service was scheduled, and whispers about a gathering that was not for worship of God, but of his opposite, the Black Mass. The term itself was enough to make the most devout cross themselves. It wasn't just a sin, it was a deliberate reversal of the holiest ceremony the church possessed. Where the Mass celebrated the sacrifice of Christ, the Black Mass mocked it. Every gesture, every word, every relic was inverted, defiled, or twisted into something meant to honor the other power. In the case of Arras, the accusations were staggering. According to testimonies, some given freely, others wrung out under torture, a network of clergy, men trusted to tend the souls of the faithful, were secretly gathering in hidden chapels and crypts. The descriptions that survive are unsettling. A long table, draped not in linen, but in black velvet, candles burning, not with beeswax purity, but with the greasy smoke of tallow mixed with herbs. On the altar, a chalice, but the wine inside was darkened with something thicker, something that clung to the cup. The most damning claims concerned the use of the consecrated host, the bread believed to become the body of Christ during the Mass. Witnesses swore that these priests would steal the hosts from their own churches, only to defile them during the Black Mass, crushing them underfoot, mixing them with ash, or placing them in the mouth of a skull. The language spoken during these ceremonies was said to be unrecognizable, not Latin, not French. Some called it the tongue of the dead, an ancient broken speech that made the hair on the neck rise just to hear it. The scandal came to light when a merchant's daughter, wandering too far near the crypts beneath St. Vaast Abbey, overheard chanting. She claims she saw light flickering from a door left ajar, and inside, men in clerical robes standing in a circle around something covered in a dark cloth. She ran before she could see what lay beneath it. Her story spread. At first it was dismissed as gossip, the kind that could ruin a reputation but seldom reached higher ears. But when another witness came forward, a servant who claimed to have delivered food to a locked room in the abbey, only to find bones laid out on the table, the whispers turned into accusations. The bishop's court opened an investigation. It did not take long for arrests to begin. Some of the accused were parish priests, others were monks, respected for decades, and a few, disturbingly, were confessors, men trusted with the deepest sins of their parishioners. The trials were grim, the use of torture was common, and the confessions it produced were both shocking and suspect. Men spoke of oaths signed in blood, of kissing the feet of a shadowy figure, of drinking from chalices that smelled of iron. One man swore that, during a midnight ceremony, the form of a great black hound appeared among them, its eyes glowing in the candlelight. Another claimed he had been promised long life and worldly success, if he would only bring more hosts to the next gathering. In the end, several priests were found guilty. Some were burned at the stake, their ashes scattered beyond the city walls. Others simply vanished from the records, as if they had been quietly removed from this world without public execution. And yet, the strangest part of the affair is what happened after. Despite the trials, despite the punishments, strange reports continued. Lights flickering in the crypts, voices chanting under the floorboards of St. Vaast. One night, a watchman claimed he saw hooded figures slipping into the old cemetery, and though he gave chase, he found no footprints in the frost. It is tempting to see the Black Mass of Arras as a relic of paranoia, a dark chapter in a city's history that has long since faded. But even today, in the narrow alleys near the cathedral, there are doorways that locals pass without glancing at, windows bricked over long ago, and every so often a story surfaces about a locked room in the abbey that no one dares open, because some say the priests who served the devil in Arras were not all caught, and their mass has never truly ended. Chapter 5, the Hexed Psalms, Hymns that Summon Death. The monasteries of medieval Europe were places of quiet discipline. Stone corridors smelled faintly of beeswax and parchment. The air was often filled with the low hum of chanting, a sound so constant and soft it became part of the very walls. Psalms were not simply songs to the monks. They were living prayers, carried on the breath, believed to hold power that could heal the spirit, bless a harvest, or turn away evil. To alter them was unthinkable, and yet there are records, sparse, fragmented, often buried within margins or written in strange code, that speak of psalmi maledicti, the cursed psalms. The earliest known mention comes from a Benedictine scribe in the late 12th century. In a diary not meant for the public, he wrote of a melody that walks like death in the cloister. He did not describe the words, only that it was a variation of a familiar psalm, one every monk would have known by heart. And yet, when sung in this altered form, it left those who heard it pale, trembling, and overcome by fever before nightfall. The account might have been dismissed as superstition, had it not been for the strange consistency of later reports. A century later, in a Cistercian abbey in what is now northern France, several brothers died within days of each other. Their symptoms were described in the annals as madness of the mind and heat of the body. The prior's own notes, never meant for public reading, claimed that the deaths began after the arrival of a visiting cantor from another monastery. This man had been heard humming a peculiar tune alone at night in the chapel. The melody, the prior wrote, was sweet yet bitter in the ear. Before the cantor could be questioned, he disappeared. What made these psalms dangerous was not the words alone, though the variations in text often hinted at blasphemy hidden beneath reverent phrases. It was the music. Music in the medieval world was thought to shape the soul, to lift it toward heaven, or pull it toward something else entirely. The altered psalms often began in the familiar rhythm, comforting and predictable, but somewhere mid-chant, the intervals would twist. Notes stretched too long, or fell in a way that pulled the harmony down like a stone into dark water. Those trained in sacred song claimed the change was deliberate, a bending of the rules set out by the church's own musical canon. In the archives of a Spanish monastery, there is a surviving fragment of one such psalm. It is written in red ink, unlike the surrounding black, and the notation is jagged, uneven. Next to it, a warning in Latin reads, "Non canitur in oribus hominum." It must not be sung in the ears of men. The implication is chilling. The melody was to be preserved only as a warning, never performed again. And yet, the very existence of that notation suggests a lingering temptation, a curiosity to hear what had been forbidden. The church's official stance was silence. When these incidents surfaced, they were quietly dealt with. Manuscripts were confiscated and burned. Choir masters who knew the variations were reassigned or, in rare cases, confined to their quarters until they recovered from error. There was no formal public decree, perhaps because to admit the danger would be to admit that Holy Scripture could be made into a weapon. Still, the records that survive hint at patterns. The cursed psalms were almost always linked to times of unrest, plague years, sieges, famines. Some believe they were born of desperation, a cry to God so distorted by grief and anger that it attracted something else entirely. One story, told in hushed tones by monks even into the 18th century, speaks of a rural chapel in Bohemia where the psalm was sung deliberately. The priest there was said to be bitter, resentful of the bishop who had stripped him of lands and tithes. In the weeks following a particularly harsh winter, he began teaching his small choir a version of Psalm 109, a psalm already known for its imprecations against enemies. Within a month, nearly every family in the parish had lost someone to a sudden, inexplicable fever. When the bishop's men arrived, they found the chapel empty, the priest gone, and the psalm book missing. Some modern scholars argue these tales are nothing more than medieval ways of explaining outbreaks of disease. The timing is suspicious, they say, music coinciding with illness, not causing it. And yet, one cannot ignore the handful of reports that mention effects within hours of hearing the hymn. There is the account of Brother Mathieu in 1347, who collapsed mid-service after hearing a fellow monk hum the first lines of an unapproved melody in the cloister garden, or the tale from Canterbury, where 3 lay brothers working on the roof of the cathedral fell to their deaths after a traveling friar sang a psalm variant in the nave below. Coincidence? Or something far older than coincidence? The fascination with the cursed psalms has never entirely faded. Fragments have surfaced in private collections, a few bars of melody written in the margins of unrelated texts, a single altered verse tucked between lines of a legitimate hymn. Collectors claim that to hum even one line feels heavy, as if the air around the notes thickens. One modern musicologist, after attempting to reconstruct one such psalm from the fragment in Spain, refused to speak of it again, saying only, "It should not exist." The Church, for its part, remains guarded. Official archivists will neither confirm nor deny the survival of these hymns. But among the older monks there is a phrase sometimes whispered in the cloister after dark. Non omnia cantanda sunt. Not all things are to be sung, and so the Hexed Psalms remain, half in shadow, half in memory. Perhaps they are nothing more than superstitious cautionary tales, or perhaps, somewhere in a forgotten drawer of an abbey library, lies a page of notes that, if sung aloud, could still call down illness, madness, or worse. And if such a psalm truly exists, one might pray it remains silent, because music, once heard, can never be unheard. Chapter 6. The Trial of the Werewolf Priest. In the late 16th century, Livonia was a land of deep forests and darker stories. The winters were long and brutal. Wolves prowled the frozen roads at night, their cries carrying over the snow. To the peasants who lived there, wolves were more than animals. They were omens, messengers of hunger and death. It was here, in this cold and haunted borderland between pagan memory and Christian rule, that the tale of the werewolf priest took shape. His name was recorded as Father Micolas in the parish rolls. Not much is known of his early life, except that he came from a poor family, and that he had a reputation for being solitary, more comfortable in the forest than in the market square. He served a small rural church, a squat wooden building where candle smoke clung to the rafters and the floorboards creaked like old bones. By all accounts, he was a capable priest. He said mass, tended to the sick, and buried the dead when winter claimed them. And yet, the villagers whispered, they said he moved silently, too silently, along the forest paths. They said he stared too long at the moon. The trouble began after a harsh winter, when a series of graves in the churchyard were found disturbed. Snow lay trampled around them, as if by heavy paws. The coffins had been clawed open, and the bodies, what remained of them, looked gnawed. The villagers blamed wolves, but the tracks were strange, too large for an ordinary wolf, too deep in the frozen earth, as if pressed by something heavier. Then came the stories of a great gray wolf seen at dusk near the rectory, a wolf with eyes the color of a man's. By spring, the rumors had reached the local magistrate. The church, already wary of anything that might hint at heresy or witchcraft, sent inquisitors from Riga. They arrived unannounced, in black cloaks that seemed to drink in the light, and questioned the villagers one by one. At first, Micolas denied everything, but under the inquisitors' methods, the relentless questioning, the sleepless nights, the slow tightening of rope around his limbs, he began to change his story. He confessed, not to heresy, not to witchcraft, but to something far older. He told them he was a werewolf, not cursed, he insisted, not a creature of Satan, but part of an ancient brotherhood that hunted in the spirit world. He said they fought against witches and evil spirits that threatened the harvests. Yet, in the same breath, he admitted to feasting on corpses in the graveyard during the leanest winters. The inquisitors recorded every word, though much of the transcript is missing now, either rotted away or locked away in the forbidden archives. What survives is unsettling in its calmness. Micolas spoke plainly, without rage or desperation, as if he were merely describing the way one mends a fence or lights a fire. When pressed, He described the transformation. He claimed it happened during certain nights of the year, when the moon's pull was strongest. A great heaviness would come over him, and his limbs would ache, his vision would sharpen, his hearing deepen, and his thoughts would fill with the scent of blood and earth. His body would change, like unfastening a cloak, he said, and he would run on 4 legs into the forest. He remembered chasing deer, tasting their fear in the air. He remembered finding the graves, drawn not by hunger alone, but by something deeper, something he could not name. The court naturally saw this as proof of diabolical pact. The idea of a good werewolf was too foreign, too dangerous. Theologians argued that even if he believed he served God in these hunts, the transformation itself was unnatural, a corruption of the divine order. The trial lasted weeks. The people came to watch, some with pity, others with grim satisfaction. When he was finally condemned, the verdict was not for lycanthropy. The law had no formal charge for that, but for heresy, necromancy, and desecration of holy ground. The sentence was death by burning. On the morning of his execution, witnesses said Mikolas walked to the stake calmly, the frost crunching under his bare feet. When the fire was lit, a great wind rose up, scattering snow into the flames. Some swore they heard a howl, not of pain, but of something wild and free, echoing from the forest beyond the village. After his death, the disturbances in the graveyard stopped, but for years afterward, hunters claimed to see a massive gray wolf at the edge of the forest, watching them with unblinking eyes. It never attacked, and it never ran when approached. It simply faded into the trees, as if melting into another world. Today, the church's official records make no mention of Father Mikolas, but in the archives of certain old monasteries, if one knows which shelves to search, there are small, leather-bound volumes with notes in a hand that is not quite Latin, not quite vernacular. Somewhere in those pages the story survives, not as a warning, but as a reminder that the line between man and beast is thinner than we care to believe. And perhaps on winter nights when the wind is high and the snow gleams silver under the moon, that line disappears entirely. Chapter 7. The Nun Who Spoke in Tongues of Hell. In the quiet stone halls of a convent in Sicily, the days once passed with the rhythm of prayer and silence. The sisters rose before dawn, their breath visible in the cold air, and gathered in the chapel to chant the divine office. The sound was soft, steady, almost like the hum of bees. It was a place where nothing unexpected ever seemed to happen. That changed in the summer of 1676. The nun's name was recorded as Sister Maria Crocifissa della Concezione. She was young, barely in her 20s, but already known for her devotion. She fasted often, slept little, and spent hours in the chapel alone. Some saw this as holy discipline. Others quietly wondered if it was too much for a young mind to bear. The first signs were subtle. She began waking in the night, trembling, with no memory of dreams, but the feeling of something standing at her bedside. Her sisters would find her in the morning, pale and distracted, whispering fragments of words they could not understand. Then came the morning when she was found in her cell, sitting rigid at her desk. In front of her lay a sheet of paper covered in an unrecognizable script, curling, jagged lines, symbols that seemed to twist in upon themselves. Her hand still clutched the quill, and her eyes were wide and glassy, staring at something beyond the room. When she finally spoke, it was in a language no one recognized. Not Latin, not Greek, not the local dialect. It was harsh, guttural, and yet strangely rhythmic, as though it followed rules none of them knew. The abbess feared possession. The church was called. 2 priests arrived from Palermo, bringing holy water and the authority to investigate. When they asked Sister Maria to speak, she answered in that same alien tongue, words tumbling out faster than they could write them down. One of the priests tried to repeat a phrase she said. She laughed, not cruelly, but with a strange, distant amusement, as if at a child's mistake. In her more lucid moments, Maria claimed she had been visited by dark ones in her cell. They came, she said, when the candles burned low and the shadows pooled in the corners. They spoke to her in this language, urging her to reject God. She told the priests she resisted, but the words burned in her mind and sometimes spilled out before she could stop them. One morning, she awoke to find another page filled with writing. She had no memory of creating it. This time, the symbols seemed denser, more intricate, almost like diagrams or maps. For centuries, the church kept these writings locked away. Scholars who were permitted to see them often left unsettled. The script seemed to be a mixture, parts resembling ancient alphabets, others entirely unfamiliar. Some letters looked like they belonged in Greek, others like fragments of Phoenician or runes, but they fit together too perfectly to be random. In 2017, a team of linguists and codebreakers tried to analyze one of the surviving pages using advanced algorithms. They claimed to find fragments of intelligible words in Latin, Greek, and even Arabic. The phrases they reconstructed were disturbing lines cursing the Holy Trinity, mocking Christ, and declaring that God was a creation of man. Yet the text was incomplete. Much of it resisted translation, either because it was an invented language or because the grammar itself was built to obscure meaning. Some suspected it was a cipher, but a cipher that only Maria, or whatever spoke through her, could unlock. The church's official explanation was cautious. They did not declare it a miracle, nor did they label it outright possession. Instead, they suggested it was the work of an unstable mind. But among the nuns of that convent, the belief lingered that Sister Maria had been chosen, or targeted, by something far darker than madness. According to the old records, Sister Maria lived for many years after the events, continuing her duties quietly. She never again spoke the language openly, though she sometimes woke screaming in the night, and she never destroyed the pages. When she died, they were found folded neatly in the drawer of her writing desk, the ink still dark and fresh-looking, as though it had been written yesterday. Today, the pages are kept under glass in a secure archive. Visitors are rarely allowed to see them and never to touch. But there are stories, told by archivists in hushed voices, of people who have tried to copy the script and found their hands cramping, their thoughts clouding, as if the shapes themselves resisted being reproduced. And sometimes, late at night, the archivists say they hear whispers in the storage rooms. Not loud, not clear, but in a tongue that feels older than the walls themselves. Chapter 8. The Monastery That Vanished Overnight. High in the Carpathian Mountains, where the pines grow so thick the wind itself seems to lose its way, there are ruins the locals refuse to approach after dark. You will not find them on modern maps. The road to reach them is nothing more than a forgotten trail of stone steps swallowed by moss, climbing until it disappears into the fog. What little is known comes from fragments, letters, travel journals, and a few church records yellowed with age. Together, they tell a story that should not be possible. The monastery was said to have been built in the 14th century, perched on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. It housed a small order of monks, a mix of local recruits and men from distant lands who came seeking solitude. They followed the rule of Saint Benedict: prayer, work, silence. Visitors described the place as humble but warm, the chapel filled with candlelight, the refectory with the scent of bread and herbs from their gardens. For decades, it seemed untouched by the turbulence of the outside world. And then, one winter evening, it was gone. The last letter we have from the monastery was dated February 2nd. It spoke of nothing unusual, just weather reports, news of a lamb born early, and thanks for a shipment of wax candles. But when a merchant arrived a week later with flour and wine, he found the gates open. Snow had drifted into the courtyard. The fires in the kitchen had gone cold. Inside, there were signs of life paused mid-motion. Bowls of soup on the tables, half-eaten and stiff with frost. Tools still laid out beside unfinished repairs to the chapel roof. Beds rumpled and unmade. Even the candles in the chapel were burned down only halfway, their wicks hardened in place. And on the altar, carved deep into the stone, were two words, non serviam, I will not serve. The merchant fled down the mountain, and when he returned with others, the place was the same, except for one difference. The soup was frozen solid, the candles were unlit, and every Bible in the building had been stacked in the center of the refectory floor, as though gathered for a purpose no one wanted to finish. No bodies were found. No footprints led away in the snow, though the drifts outside were light enough to record the smallest step. It was as if the monks had risen in the middle of their day and simply stepped out of the world. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the monastery had been built over a pagan burial ground, and the dead had claimed it back. Others whispered of a traveling priest who brought with him a book bound in black leather, filled with prayers that were not prayers at all. The more superstitious villagers insisted they heard chanting from the ridge on certain nights, slow, low voices rising and falling, though no smoke rose from the chimneys anymore. A century later, a small group of pilgrims tried to restore the monastery. They rebuilt part of the wall, repaired the roof, and planned to reconsecrate the chapel. But on their third night, they abandoned the place, leaving behind their tools. The leader of the group later claimed that the bells began ringing at midnight, even though the ropes had been removed centuries earlier. Today, what remains is a hollow shell. The walls are choked with ivy. The stone altar still stands, though the inscription has been worn shallow by time and frost. Yet, travelers who have ventured there, few as they are, swear the words are still legible, and that the air inside the chapel is always colder than outside, even in midsummer. In the village far below, the elders warn that if you stay there too long after sunset, you will hear footsteps in the courtyard. Not hurried, not hostile, just the sound of men moving through their daily work. And if you follow them, they say, you will see nothing, but you may notice that the bowls on the tables are no longer frozen. And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey. If this story kept you company, eased your mind, or helped you drift into a gentler place, then I'm truly glad you were here. This is what Relic of Stories is all about, bringing the echoes of the past to life in a way that feels safe, calm, and timeless. If you've found comfort here, if these stories help you sleep, inspire your imagination, or simply make the world feel a little softer, I'd love for you to stay a while. You can do that by subscribing so you never miss the next tale we uncover together. Until then, may your dreams be peaceful, your nights be quiet, and your heart be light. Good night, and I'll see you in the next story.